By now, you've probably heard of the viral news story that a billionaire-owned biotechnology and genetic engineering company named Colossal Biosciences debuted what they are referring to as dire wolves. This is an extinct species of large canid that once roamed the Americas approximately 125,000 to 10,000 years ago. This species recently gained popularity and obsession thanks to a little-known series called Game of Thrones, where they appeared as white-colored magical beings. I think. I've never watched it. So apparently, Colossal's scientists used the gene editing technology CRISPR to modify a donor gray wolf genome. The highest quality cell lines were cloned, implanted into donor eggs, and then they were carried to term in domestic dogs to create the dire wolves, accomplishing what they are now referring to as the de-extinction of this species. The wolves do indeed signify a landmark achievement in biosciences and gene technology, possibly setting the stage for future scientific advancements. The company had earlier announced the creation of woolly mice, which were meant to be a first step in another proposed de-extinction project to revive the woolly mammoth. They also cloned some endangered red wolves, which are getting far less attention. The company has also set its sights on bringing back the thylacine and the dodo bird with their methods. However, the reactions to this groundbreaking news have been notably mixed. At first, the announcement instantly made national headlines, with mainstream news platforms like Time, CBS News, and The New Yorker repeating Colossal's claim that they have brought back the species from extinction in their headlines. Photos and videos of the white wolf pups howling seem to garner praise and excitement on social media. You would see dramatic titles and quotes suggesting that this is the first time in 10,000 years that the howl of the dire wolf has been heard, etc. And Time prominently displayed this photo, exclaiming it as a dire wolf, with the words extinct crossed out. Just as quickly as the media had sensationalized this story, it seemed then that things took a turn. In addition to the incredibly lame, constant comparisons to Jurassic Park and the semi-jokes that we should be paying attention to some Hollywood movies when considering if this should be done or not, there was notable backlash from the scientific community. They denounced Colossal's claim that these are dire wolves, stating that they are actually just slightly modified versions of gray wolves, which was the animal used in the project. No dire wolf DNA was ever used in the development of these animals. Dire wolf DNA was merely a blueprint, and the genes chosen mainly account for appearance. What's worse, only a tiny portion of that gray wolf's genetic structure was actually altered. 20 edits were made to 14 genes out of their 19,000 genes. These genes from the gray wolf that accounted for traits like coat color and size were altered from these pre-existing gray wolf genes, instead of splicing DNA derived from actual ancient dire wolves. Essentially, the critics suggested these animals are like wolves with a different paint job, only superficially resembling the extinct creatures. Maybe. They've also remarked that the dire wolves are the wrong color, there is no academic paper to back the company's claims, and most importantly, the gray wolf embryo used in the creations is not closely related to dire wolves. In fact, dire wolves are in an entirely separate genus from gray wolves. Their closest living relatives are said to be African jackals and African painted dogs. While the company has claimed that their research indicated that dire wolves were lighter in color and that they needed to make them white to avoid a deleterious gene that may cause blindness, they have also been accused of choosing this white coloration so that the animals resemble the dire wolves from Game of Thrones merely as a publicity stunt. This isn't a baseless claim, considering the author of that book series' involvement as an investor in the company. Conservationists also lamented that such procedures can distract from the conservation of current species. So I'm just going to get right into it. Are these animals real dire wolves? The answer should be obvious at this point. No, they are not. The company appears to have a very bizarre idea of what actually constitutes a species, which does actually open up a conversation about the complexities of that issue. What defines a species? It's not as concrete as you might think. If it looks like a dire wolf and acts like a dire wolf, I'm gonna call it a dire wolf, said Colossal's chief science officer. That sounds, really stupid. These white so-called dire wolves look something like a wolf-Samoyed hybrid in my opinion, and they fail to excite me. They come off as designer animals produced from advanced technology, and that's actually pretty disappointing. For years I've been hearing about the proposals of bringing back animals like thylacines, and I thought they would be doing something like they've done in Jurassic Park, which would would be utilizing real DNA to clone up the actual animal. Sadly, ancient DNA is just too fractured. Now I'm hearing that we're just taking DNA from living species and kind of dressing them up without the evolutionary history and selective pressures that gave rise to the true species. I also wonder how factors such as epigenetics or environmentally induced traits that occur without changes to DNA would come into play here. Without these influences, we are more than likely not only not seeing a real dire wolf, but just a completely made-up Franken creature. One of the reasons I love owning unique pets like foxes and armadillos is that I enjoy caring for and experiencing these animals that are millions of years in the making. Each one is unique and special, regardless of the slight impacts of domestication and hand-rearing. Given that only small genetic changes were made, there's no way to know if Colossal's dire wolves are truly behaving like the animals they're meant to replicate. I also believe that genes accounting for behavior are not well understood. Colossal's creations are instead a wild card, not entirely gray wolf or dire wolf. But with that being said, now that dire wolves are sorta kinda possible to create, or at least larger wolves that are unique in themselves, how would one go about keeping them in captivity, or even as personal pets? Pets? Yes, some critics did accuse Colossal of potentially seeking to create a future market to service rich exotic pet owners, believe it or not. But perhaps it's not such a far-fetched idea. Obviously, the more respected accredited zoos would either not desire or be permitted to display unnatural creations like these, so that would leave the placement of these animals only to other facilities that could potentially include privately owned zoos and affluent pet owners. Maybe, who knows? As of right now, the modified dire wolves are being cared for at an undisclosed facility. What does it take to care for a dire wolf? Colossal actually has a care manual for the animals despite having owned them for a brief period of time. Go figure. Of course, one could reasonably guess that dire wolves should be cared for just like regular wolves, and that appears to be the case in the manual. The expansive facility housing the animals is certified by the American Humane Society and is being referred to as an ecological preserve. The site includes, quote, specialized engagement zones and habit types and is enclosed by 10-foot-tall zoo-grade fencing with redundant perimeter security. These free-roaming wolves are monitored with cameras and drones. Quote, the wolves will be monitored and observed to assess their readiness to move into larger protected and managed care facilities. The dire wolf's care pretty much emulates the care standards from AZA manuals. According to the manual, the wolf's nutritional requirements can be reached by feeding a good quality dry dog food such as Purina Pro Plan and Hill's Science diets that are meat-based. Yes, believe it or not, kibble and other prepared diets are used and preferred by zoos. This is the best way to avoid nutritional deficiencies in captive animals. Of course, the diet is supplemented with animal parts for enrichment. The care manual describes accepted forms of sanitation, enrichment programs, overly complicated rules on training, and how the animals should be interacted with. One particular part is interesting: whether or not the animal should be managed with unprotected contact, which is when there is no barrier between the animals and the caretaker. The manual states this is risky for humans, and that, quote, most non-domestic animals, usually everything except domestic dogs and cats, prefer protected contact as it gives them control of their environment and allows them more choice, often providing better welfare options for the animal. That's just yet another example of pure ignorance about how animals operate. Anyone who believes that cats naturally prefer to be around humans clearly hasn't tried to approach feral cats or even regular free-roaming cats they don't own. It seems to me that much of the care manual is just made-up assumptions, of course, that has been created to give the project legitimacy in the eyes of professional animal care institutions. Not much wrong with that, I guess. Colossal plans on restoring their dire wolves on, quote, ecological preserves, potentially on indigenous land. So here's what I don't understand. It seems as though the ultimate goal the company has is to establish these animals in a naturalized setting. So why are there photos of people holding them like pets? When you see things like this, it is generally a sign that animals are being hand-reared and socialized like pets. Supposedly, the wolves were initially placed with a surrogate dog, but were removed due to various issues. Still, their exposure to humans as companions seems evident. Reputable zoos that hate the idea of pet ownership and aren't rearing animals as so-called ambassadors are supposed to be against this. It's just oh so typical to see the individuals trying to hype up animals as wild, while cradling them in their arms, telling us they are not pets or whatever and only they are special enough to be worthy to interact with them. These dire wolfish animals have clearly been socialized like pets, so why are they roaming acres of land as though they are supposed to be truly wild? And speaking of that, there's this absurd mentality that dire wolves have specialized needs. I was shocked and taken aback by some of the criticism leveled at keeping these animals in captivity. You'd expect this lame knee-jerk reaction from the usual suspects, PETA, etc. However, in the widely distributed Time article, this dude, Jeffrey Kluger, had the gall to suggest that even 2,000 acres is not enough space for these animals. I had to rub my eyes and read it again. Kluger actually wrote, "Wolf packs can, on occasion, be as small as 2 members, but typically include 15 or more. What's more, the animal's hunting territory can range anywhere from 50 to 1,000 square miles. Against that, Colossal's 3 dire wolves spending their entire lives in a 2,000-acre preserve could be awfully lonely and claustrophobic. Not at all the way wild dire wolves would live their lives. 2,000 acres. Claustrophobic." For reference, the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Colorado, which is famous for having some of the largest enclosures in the world for its lions, tigers, and bears, their largest cage is a measly 300 acres. The dire wolves are supposedly, and I say supposedly because I highly doubt it's true, living in a space 6 times larger than that. Even the online magazine Slate mentions the 2,000-acre size and then states, "It seems that the wolves may never know life outside some kind of confinement." Oh no, not confinement. What's next? Technically, island-living animals are also suffering in confinement, and those that are confined to certain habitats that they need to survive. The poor things. There is absolutely no way that these animals have any clue they are confined in even a so-called small enclosure of only 5 acres. This is what happens when you don't possess the intelligence to understand that animals do not need the same amount of space they roam in the wild to have excellent welfare. In the wild, they traverse these huge distances out of complete necessity, following prey. This is why feeding wild animals is often discouraged. Sometimes, when fed enough, some wild animals will choose to stop migrating and change their behaviors when provided with enough sustenance. They may even seek humans out more often, leading to a form of self-domestication. They need to remove Kruger from his position as a science writer for Time if this is an example of his understanding of topics. The same goes for Marina Bolotnikova, who wrote a Vox article on the subject. She repeats the claim that the dire wolves are in inadequately sized spaces and even suggests that the dire wolves will, quote, suffer in zoos, as though to suggest that we all concur that a zoo is inherently cruel. Dire wolves, or whatever this thing is, are not special. They can be kept in enclosures just like regular wolves, lions, tigers, whatever. People seem to have fully bought the idea that Colossal cultivated, that they are magical beings that need to be free or whatever. This animal rights narrative that I see rearing its ugly head is also incredibly disappointing when it comes to scientific advancements like these. I've seen endless comments suggesting that we shouldn't bring back extinct species even if we could, because they might be living in captivity. The constant references to fictional popcorn flicks and the don't play God theme that practically defines the science fiction genre also seem to be playing a role here. This attitude would ultimately make it difficult for a company to gain support for future endeavors like these. Maybe Colossal didn't make real dire wolves, but imagine what their technology could achieve for captive animals and existing endangered species. Which brings us to our next subject, genetically modified pets. Is it ethical to create and keep them? Some have criticized the development of these cloned animals, citing the invasive procedures of implanting embryos into the host mother and the unpredictable nature of the effects this genetic engineering may have on the animals produced. Yet we already domesticated dog breeds that are somewhat genetically altered utilizing more natural methods, aka inbreeding, and we deem this acceptable. Some of these animals clearly suffer from traits we intentionally breed into them, and this is justified by dog breeders who say they just need to be health tested, and we don't breed the unlucky individuals born with poor health. That's probably similar to what Colossal is doing. One last concern I have is this. Colossal shouldn't be trying to reintroduce the dire wolf to nature, especially when it appears that their main motive is to scratch the itch of the public's interest in this species due to its presence in pop culture. This species disappeared due to several theorized factors, including climate change, prey availability, and hunting by primitive hunter-human societies. All of these are natural causes. There's this idea that the extinction of a species is bad, but extinction is a part of evolution and life, and When the world that supported these mega predators no longer exists, dire wolves and any other ancient creatures created by technology should exist to be displayed to satisfy human fascination and understanding. There is nothing wrong with doing this as long as we care for them properly.